The auction yard baked under the afternoon sun, the dust lifting in slow swirls around the crowd. It wasn't cattle or horses they were bidding on now. It was a person. Gage Holleran stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, hat shadowing his eyes. He'd come to buy feedstock, not to watch the sheriff read out a young woman's name like she was a piece of land. But when the sheriff's voice carried across the yard, Gage couldn't look away. Tessa Moore, the sheriff said, owed debts from her late father's gambling. Contract for work service, 6 months. A murmur went through the men gathered there, rough laughter, ugly talk. They weren't interested in her labor. They were thinking about what else a desperate woman might be made to give. Tessa stood on the platform, her dress plain, hands clenched in front of her. She didn't beg or cry. Her chin was high, though her cheeks burned. The sheriff held up a folded paper. Starting bid $50, silence. Then someone snickered. She ain't worth half that. Gage felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know her, but there was something wrong in the way the crowd leaned forward like wolves waiting for meat. He could have turned and walked away, should have. His own ranch was half ruined, his debts deep as the canyon north of his land. But before he could stop himself, he heard his own voice cut through the noise. $10, the laughter turned mean. Guess Holleran's buying himself company, someone called. Gage ignored them, eyes fixed on the sheriff. You said work service. That's all I'm buying, the sheriff shrugged. $10 once. Twice, no one else bid. The gavel hit the table. Sold. Tessa's eyes met Gage's for the first time. There was no gratitude there, only pride, sharp as glass. When the crowd broke apart, Gage stepped forward. Miss Moore, he said quietly, I don't aim to own you. Just keep you from worse trouble. Her voice was soft but steady. Then I'll work for what you paid. He nodded once. My ranch is a long ride out. Pack light. They left town before sundown, the sheriff's paper folded in Gage's pocket like a brand neither of them wanted. The trail to Holleran Ranch was dry and silent. They didn't speak much. Once, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Tessa asked, You did that out of pity? Gage didn't answer right away. No, out of decency. Feels the same when you're the one being pitied, she said. He glanced at her. Dust on her boots, hair pulled tight, shoulders squared against shame. You'll earn it back, he said finally. Every cent. When they reached the ranch, dusk had settled. The place looked as tired as its owner. Fences leaning, porch steps loose, corral half empty. A dog barked once from under the porch, then fell silent. This is it, Gage said. Tessa took in the dry fields, the broken gate, the long stretch of lonely land. Then we both owe more than we can pay, she murmured. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Reckon so. Inside the house, he showed her a small room off the kitchen. You can stay here. There's work enough come morning. She nodded and set her small bag down. Gage turned to leave, but she said, Mr. Holleran? He paused. I'm not afraid of work, she said, but I won't be pitied. I'd rather earn my keep. He met her eyes, saw the same pride that made her stand tall on that auction platform. Then we understand each other. Outside, the night wind moved across the dry grass, carrying the faint scent of rain. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled, a promise or a warning. Morning came with the smell of dust and coffee. Tessa was already up when Gage stepped into the kitchen. She had a pot boiling on the stove. Her sleeves rolled high, her hair tied back. The table, once cluttered with tools and papers, was cleared. You didn't have to start this early, Gage said. She didn't look up. I couldn't sleep. Figured I'd find something to do. He nodded, awkward. There's stock to feed, fences to check. You ride? I can manage. Outside, the ranch looked less hopeless in daylight, but only just. The corral slats sagged, a water trough leaked, and weeds choked what little pasture remained. The horses lifted their heads as Tessa approached. One brown mare came close, nostrils flaring. Name's Juniper, Gage said. Gentle enough. You can take her when we check the south fence. Tessa stroked the mare's neck. She's hungry, she said quietly. So am I, he replied dryly. But feed costs more than talk. They rode out together, silence stretching between them. The land was wide, sunburned, and empty. When they reached the far ridge, Tessa dismounted, testing a section of wire that hung loose. "Wind did this?" she asked. "Wind and neglect," Gage said. "Hard to keep up when it's one man against everything." She bent to hammer a stake into the dirt. "Then it's two now." He watched her for a moment, the way she worked without complaint, sleeve-stained, hair sticking to her face. He turned away before she caught him looking. By noon, they rode back, tired and covered in dust. As they reached the yard, two men leaned against the porch rail, ranch hands. One spat tobacco into the dirt. "Didn't take long for the boss to find himself company," he said with a grin. Tessa froze. Gage's voice cut sharply. "That's enough, Ward." Ward lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Just talking, boss." "The whole town's talking, too." The other man, slim and quiet, kept his eyes down. "Morning, miss," he said politely. Tessa gave a stiff nod and walked past them into the house. That evening she stood at the sink, washing dishes as the sun bled red across the sky. Gage came in, removing his hat. "You shouldn't listen to talk like that," he said. "I don't," she replied. "But they do," he sighed. "People always need something to whisper about. Let them." She dried her hands on her apron. "You didn't have to defend me." "Didn't do it for you," he said. "I run this place. I won't have lies poisoning it." Her eyes flicked up to his. "Still sounds like pity." Gage hesitated, then said quietly, "I've been pitied before. It's not kindness, it's a kind of wound." For the first time she smiled, small, faint, but real. "Then we understand each other better than I thought." The following days fell into a rhythm. Tessa rose before dawn, tending to the kitchen and garden, patching clothes, mending tools. Gage worked the stockyard, and sometimes they met in the evenings to share coffee in silence. Rumors from town grew louder. The blacksmith's wife said Tessa had sold herself twice over, once to pay a debt, again for a roof. The sheriff, stopping by for coffee, mentioned it with a smirk. "Folks figure you got yourself a mail-order bride at a discount." Gage's jaw tightened. "She's under contract, that's all." The sheriff's eyes gleamed. "Sure, just be careful the story doesn't twist. Town's got long tongues." After he left, Gage sat alone on the porch, staring into the dark. Tessa came out quietly, her hands folded. "They think I belong to you," she said. "You don't," he replied. "And I'll remind them of that if I have to." She looked toward the distant lights of town. "You can't buy silence, Mr. Halloran." "No," he said, voice low. "But I can earn respect back, and so can you." She turned toward him, something fragile but fierce in her eyes. "Then let's start there." Summer came hard that year. Dry winds, cracked earth, and no mercy from the sky. Tessa worked through it, sleeves rolled, hair damp with sweat. She scrubbed, mended, cooked, and even took to helping Gage with the herd. Each morning she'd see him in the field, shoulders bent beneath the same burden she carried. Pride mixed with worry. There was a quiet rhythm between them now, built not on talk but on shared labor. Still, the town's whispers crawled through the dust like snakes. One afternoon when Tessa rode into town for supplies, the general store went silent. The shopkeeper's wife gave her a tight smile. "Need more sugar, Miss Moore? Or does Mr. Halloran prefer molasses?" Tessa's hand froze on the counter. "Just flour, please." As she paid, two women near the shelves murmured loud enough for her to hear. "She's bold, that one, playing house with a man who bought her for $10. Tessa kept her eyes down, took her parcels, and walked out. But outside her breath came short. She hadn't cried in years, not when her father gambled away their home, not when they buried him with debts unpaid. But this shame cut deeper than hunger ever had. When she reached the ranch, Gage was mending a post. "You're back early," he said. She set the parcels down harder than she meant to. "The town's mouths are wide as the canyon. You should have let me stay gone." He looked up sharply. "You don't run from cowards, Miss Moore." "I'm not running," she snapped. "I just don't want to ruin what little name you've got left." Gage leaned on the fence, studying her. My name can take it. Can you? Her jaw tightened. I'll manage. That night the storm broke. Not rain, just wind howling through the gaps in the barn. Gage went out to secure the roof, and Tessa followed with a lantern. Inside, hay flew, horses kicked. One of the ranch hands, Ward, was already there shouting curses. When Tessa reached for a rope, Ward grabbed her wrist. You don't belong in here, he said roughly. Let go, she hissed. He sneered. Maybe you think the boss's favor keeps you safe, but I see what you're doing. Before she could pull away, Gage appeared, raincoat whipping in the wind. Ward! The man dropped her arm, startled. She was— Get out, Gage barked. Ward glared, shoulders tight, but obeyed. He slammed the barn door on his way out. Tessa rubbed her wrists, the skin red. I can handle men like him, she said. I know, Gage replied. But you shouldn't have to. For a long moment they stood close, the lantern light trembling between them. Outside thunder rumbled far off, but inside the air was heavier still. Over the next days, Ward's anger grew like mold. He worked more slowly, muttering under his breath. Then one morning, Gage found the lockbox in his office open. Money missing. He called the hands together. Someone's been stealing. Best come clean before I ride into town. Ward stepped forward, smirking. Maybe your lady helper's got a heavy hand. She did bring supplies home yesterday. Tessa froze. That's a lie, Ward shrugged. Then let the sheriff decide. Gage's eyes went cold. No one's calling the law until I see proof. But doubt had already crept in. He could feel it like grit in his teeth. That evening, Tessa found him sitting by the porch rail, a lantern flickering beside him. You believe him? She asked quietly. He didn't look up. I don't know what to believe. Her voice broke for the first time. Then maybe you should have let them keep me in town. He met her gaze at last, something raw and weary in his eyes. If I did that, Miss Moore, I wouldn't have any soul left to save. The silence between them held until the lantern burned out. The next morning came gray and heavy, like the sky itself shared its unease. Tessa worked without a word, her face pale but set. Gage watched her from the porch, guilt gnawing at him. He wanted to believe her innocence, he almost did, but Ward's words had found a crack in his trust. By noon, the sheriff rode in. His horse kicked up dust as he dismounted and tipped his hat. Morning, Hollerin'. Heard you got trouble with money gone missing. Gage's jaw tightened. Word travels fast, the sheriff shrugged. It always does when a woman's involved. His eyes flicked toward Tessa, who stood near the barn, arms full of laundry. Town says you paid for her like she was livestock. Maybe she's collecting her due. Tessa's face didn't move, but her hands clenched on the fabric. You've got a sharp tongue for a lawman, she said. The sheriff smiled thinly. Just keeping peace, ma'am. If you're clean, you've got nothing to fear. Gage stepped forward. There'll be no questions unless I ask for them. You can ride back to town. The sheriff tipped his hat again. Suit yourself, Hollerin'. But if you find more missing, don't expect my mercy. He rode off slowly, dust curling behind him. Tessa turned toward Gage. You should have let him search. It would have cleared my name. I don't need him digging around here, he said. I'll handle my own. Her eyes flashed. Then handle your doubt too. That night the wind rose again, howling through the valley. Tessa couldn't sleep. She went outside, walking past the corral toward the tool shed. The night was dark but not silent. Somewhere a coyote called. As she reached the shed, she saw movement inside, a flicker of light. She stepped closer and froze. Ward was there, holding a small box, the same one Gage kept in his study. Coins clinked as he stuffed them into his coat. Ward, she said, voice steady. He spun around, eyes wide. You shouldn't be here. That money, give it back, he sneered. Or what, you'll tell your rich savior? He already thinks you're a thief. Tessa moved closer, anger burning through her fear. You set me up. He laughed low and ugly. Maybe I did. Maybe I just figured a woman with a bot name makes a fine scapegoat. Before he could move, she grabbed a shovel leaning by the door. You're done here, Ward. He hesitated, long enough for Gage's voice to cut through the dark. He's right, Ward, you are. Ward froze again. Gage stood in the doorway, pistol drawn. Drop it! The man cursed, threw the coins to the ground, and bolted past them into the night. Gage didn't chase him. He just stood there, chest rising slowly, anger buried beneath shame. You saw him? Tessa nodded, her voice shaking. He was taking what he blamed me for. Gage holstered his pistol, looked at the spilled coins and then at her. I should have believed you. You should have, she said quietly. But you didn't, he nodded once. No, I didn't, and that's on me. They picked up the coins in silence, the metal cold in their hands. When they were done, Gage said, I'll ride into town tomorrow. Tell the sheriff the truth. Tessa looked away. It won't matter. Once a story's told, folks stop listening to truth. Then we'll make them listen, he said. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not just a man hardened by loss, but one trying to build something back. You can't fix everything with decency, Mr. Halloran, she whispered. No, he said. But it's all I've got left to try with. The wind eased. Somewhere behind the hills, dawn was beginning to rise. The next day, Gage saddled his horse before sunrise. Tessa stood by the barn, arms crossed, her face unreadable. You don't have to go alone, she said. I started this mess, he replied. I'll finish it. He rode off toward town, the horizon still gray with dawn. The ride felt longer than it ever had. He thought about the look on Tessa's face when she told him he'd doubted her. It hurt more than any wound he'd taken in his life. When he reached the sheriff's office, the man was leaning back in his chair, coffee steaming beside him. Back already, Halloran? I came to set something straight, Gage said. Ward Stokes stole the money. Not Tessa Moore, the sheriff smirked. That's right. Got proof? I saw him with my own eyes. So did she. The sheriff shrugged. Hard to take the word of a man who bought himself a lady, don't you think? Gage's hand curled into a fist. You'll take my word because it's the truth. But the sheriff only smiled wider. You might have cleared her name in your own eyes, Halloran, but the town's not so quick to forget. Folks don't care about truth, they care about stories. And this one sells better the way it is. Gage left before he said something he'd regret. Outside, he looked up at the sky, the heat pressing down like judgment. By the time he got home, Tessa was in the garden, tending the small patch of green she'd coaxed from dry earth. Well? She asked without looking up. The sheriff won't help, he said. But Ward's gone for now. She straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. Then the town still believes I'm a thief. Let them, he said softly. You've done more for this land than anyone. Her eyes glistened. You think work washes away shame? It doesn't, it just hides it under calluses. Gage didn't answer. He just watched her, the way her hands trembled as she turned back to her plants. Days passed, heavy with unspoken things. The ranch began to heal. Grass returned in patches, fences stood straight, the herd fattened. But between them hung something raw and unfinished. One evening, as the sun set fire to the horizon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Dust followed him down the trail. Gage's heart sank when he saw the man's coat, faded brown with a tear by the shoulder. Ward hadn't returned. Someone worse had. Tessa saw him first, standing on the porch. Her breath caught. That's him, she whispered. Who? Gage asked. The man who played cards with my father. The one who forged the debt. The rider slowed, a sly smile cutting through his beard. Afternoon, Miss Moore. Been a long time since the river boats, hasn't it? Gage stepped forward. You've got business here? The man tipped his hat. Name's Burke, I'm here for what's owed. Tessa's voice trembled. My father's debt died with him. Burke laughed. Not if the papers say otherwise. And I've got those papers. Signed and sealed. Gage's jaw hardened. You forged them. Call it what you want, Burke said. But the law will see it my way. Unless, of course, you want to pay me quiet-like. Tessa's face went pale. You'd extort an innocent man? Burke looked her over. Ain't my first choice, sweetheart. But a man's gotta make a living. Gage stepped closer. You'll get nothing from her or from me. Burke's smile faded. Think about it, rancher. You've got a lady the town already calls bought and tainted. You really want them finding out you hid stolen contracts too? Tessa gasped. He's lying, I know, Gage said. But his stomach twisted because he knew men like Burke, they didn't bluff without reason. Burke climbed back on his horse. You've got 3 days. After that, the law comes knocking. When he rode off, dust hung in the air like smoke. Tessa turned to Gage, voice shaking. He's going to ruin us both. Gage looked out toward the fading sun. Then we fight him together. The next morning broke hot and silent as if the air itself waited for trouble. Tessa barely touched her breakfast. Gage sat across from her, reading the worn paper Burke had left on the porch overnight, a copy of the supposed debt. This isn't my father's handwriting, Tessa said, voice tight. He signed with a left slant. This one leans right. Gage studied the page, nodding. And look here, the witness mark. It's Ward's. Tessa's head snapped up. Ward? He was working for Burke. Looks that way, Gage said. That's how they set you up from the start. He folded the paper and stood. We'll ride to town, show this to the sheriff. She shook her head. The sheriff already chose his side. Then we'll find someone who hasn't. The ride to town felt longer than ever. Dust rose behind them, turning the road into a ghost trail. When they arrived, people stopped to stare. Whispers followed them like shadows. Inside the sheriff's office, the air smelled of tobacco and stale coffee. The sheriff looked up from his desk. Well, the happy couple. Gage dropped the paper on the table. Read it. Then tell me who the criminal is. The sheriff unfolded it, brows furrowing. Looks proper to me. Tessa stepped forward. Look closer. The witness's name belongs to Ward Stokes. He forged my father's debt under Burke's command. The sheriff shrugged. Could be. But unless you've got the real contract to compare it with, I can't say who's lying. Gage's voice was low, dangerous. You're saying you'll take Burke's word over ours? I'm saying I don't have time for domestic disputes dressed up as legal talk, the sheriff replied. Burke's already filed a claim on your ranch. Says you bought a woman with stolen money. Tessa froze. He did what? The sheriff leaned back. Looks like you're both tangled in something ugly. I'd settle up quietly before he brings it to the judge. Gage's fists tightened. You'd let a liar steal my land? The sheriff met his gaze without blinking. I enforce the law, Holleran. I don't fix lives. Gage turned on his heel and stormed out. Tessa followed, heart pounding. Outside, she said, He's going to take everything you own. Gage stared at the horizon, the heat shimmering over the roofs. Not if we move first. They rode back fast, the wind cutting sharply against their faces. When they reached the ranch, Gage went straight to his study and pulled out the small lockbox. Inside lay the burned edge of the first contract, the one from the auction. Tessa stared. You kept it? She asked. I tore it in half when I paid the sheriff, he said. Thought I'd never need it again. Tessa took the piece gently. If we can match the ink, we can prove Burke's paper is fake. I don't know who'd test ink out here, he muttered. She gave a small, determined smile. The preacher's wife used to keep a ledger for every wedding and sale in the county. If anyone remembers signatures, she will. They rode to the chapel before sunset. The preacher's wife, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, looked at the paper through her spectacles. This mark, she said, tapping the bottom line. I remember this one. Your father's name always slanted left. Whoever wrote this didn't know him. Tessa's breath caught. So it's forged, the woman nodded. As false as a snake in Sunday clothes. When they left the chapel, Gage felt something heavy lift from his chest. We've got proof now. Tessa looked at him, her eyes bright with hope and fear. Burke won't care about proof. He'll come for what he wants. Gage tightened his reins. Then he'll find we're not for sale. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in blood and gold. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again, closer this time, rolling toward them like a promise of reckoning. The next 2 days passed in uneasy silence. Gage worked from dawn until the stars came out, fixing fences and sharpening tools as if labor could quiet his thoughts. Tessa cooked, cleaned, and wrote letters she never sent, drafts of truth that no one in town would read. But the peace didn't last. On the third evening, the sound of hooves echoed across the valley. Gage looked up from the corral and saw 4 riders cresting the ridge. At the front rode Burke, his grin flashing under the brim of his hat. "Company," Gage muttered. Tessa stepped out onto the porch, her face pale. "He's not alone." Burke dismounted first, kicking dust from his boots. "Evening, Holleran. I see you're still playing house with your prize." Gage's hand rested on the holster at his hip. "You've got 5 seconds to speak your business." Burke spread his arms. "You already know it. I've filed my claim and the law'll back me soon enough. But I'm a fair man. Give me what's owed and I'll leave you both breathing." Tessa's voice cut through the heat. "You forged my father's debt. You've got nothing owed to you." Burke laughed. "Maybe. But folks believe what's written, not what's whispered. And I've got the papers." He turned to Gage. "You think you can outstubborn me, rancher? You can't fight a lie with a hammer." Gage stepped forward, calm but fierce. "No, but I can fight a liar with lead." Burke's grin faded. "You wouldn't risk your land over her." Gage's voice hardened. "I'd risk more than land." The men behind Burke shifted uneasily. One, younger than the rest, whispered, "Boss, maybe we—" Burke silenced him with a glare. "You heard the man. He wants a fight." He turned back to Gage. "You'll regret this." Gage stood his ground. "Maybe. But I'll regret less than selling my soul to cowards." The moment hung heavy, the kind that makes the air stop moving. Then Burke mounted his horse again. 3 days, he said. "If you're smart, you'll have the deed ready. Otherwise, I'll take it myself." They rode off, leaving dust curling behind them like smoke from a fuse. Tessa turned to Gage. "You can't face them all." "I don't plan to," he said, "but I'll be ready if they come." She followed him into the barn. "You'll get yourself killed." He looked at her then, tired eyes softening. "If it keeps you free, that's a price I'll pay." Tessa grabbed his arm. "Don't talk like that," he met her gaze. "You said once you wouldn't be pitied." "I don't pity you, Tessa. I respect you. Enough to fight for what's right." Her voice shook. "Then let me fight too." He almost smiled. "Didn't think you'd ask permission." That night they worked side by side, boarding windows, checking rifles, filling water troughs. The ranch felt different, tense, alive, waiting. As the moon climbed, Tessa paused by the corral fence. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Once," he said quietly, "when everything I loved was buried under it." She looked toward the far hills. "Then maybe this land deserves a chance to grow something better." He turned to her, the silver light catching his face. "Maybe we both do." A silence stretched between them, not heavy this time, but steady, like a bridge built from pain and trust. Then, faint in the distance, a coyote howled. Gage glanced toward the dark ridge where Burke had gone. "He'll be back by dawn," he said. Tessa's jaw tightened. "Then let him come. This ranch won't fall to lies." He nodded once. "No, it won't." They stood together under the moon, 2 stubborn souls ready for whatever storm the morning would bring. The first light of dawn came thin and gray. The ranch was quiet but not peaceful, the kind of silence that waits before thunder. Gage checked his rifle, his movements slow and careful. Beside him, Tessa packed supplies, bandages, water, and a handful of cartridges she'd found in a drawer. "You don't have to stay out here," he said. She shook her head. "If I run now, they'll call me guilty forever." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we stand together." By mid-morning, the sound of hooves rose again, more this time. Burke had returned, bringing 5 men with him. They spread out as they approached, dust clouds circling them like smoke. Burke called out, "You ready to hand over that deed, Holleran?" Gage stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "You'll get nothing but lead." Burke grinned. "So be it." The first shot cracked through the still air. Boards splintered off the porch rail. Tessa ducked, heart pounding, then crawled toward the barn. She'd seen Gage's plan the night before. He'd left a second rifle inside, hidden beneath a tarp. Bullets whined past as she reached it. She loaded it with shaking hands, hearing Gage return fire from the porch. Each shot was measured, steady. He wasn't wasting rounds. Burke shouted orders, his men flanking the corral. "Smoke 'em out." One man tossed a lantern toward the haystack. Flames leaped fast, licking up the dry stalks. Tessa stood, aimed, and fired. The shot struck the lantern thrower's arm. He dropped, yelling. Burke snarled. "She's shooting too? You really did buy yourself trouble, Holleran." Gage shouted back. "You don't know the meaning of trouble." Gunfire thundered again. A bullet tore through the porch beam beside Gage's head. He dropped behind a post, breathing hard. "Tessa," he called, "get to the back pen." But she didn't move. She fired again, hitting the wheel of a wagon to block a rider's path. Smoke began to choke the yard, orange light rising against the wind. Burke moved through the haze, pistol drawn, eyes burning with greed. "You can't win, Holleran," he shouted. "You're 1 man against 6. "Then come prove it," Gage growled. They met near the corral, both half blinded by smoke. Gage's rifle was empty. He swung it like a club, striking Burke's arm. The pistol went off wildly, grazing Gage's shoulder. He grunted, pain flashing through him, but didn't fall. Burke swung again, striking his jaw. "You should have sold her when you had the chance," he hissed. Gage caught his wrist, twisting until the gun dropped to the dirt. "You can't sell what isn't yours." They struggled, rolling in the dust until a gunshot split the air. Both men froze. Tessa stood a few paces away, the second rifle steady in her hands. "It's over," she said. Burke looked at her, chest heaving. "You wouldn't shoot me." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I already did." He glanced at his wounded man, groaning by the fence. "You'll hang for this, girl." "No," Gage said, rising to his feet, blood streaking his sleeve. "You will." Burke's eyes flicked toward the road. Hoofbeats were coming fast. The sheriff and 2 deputies rode into view. The sheriff shouted, "Drop your weapons." Burke hesitated, but Gage was faster. He grabbed the pistol from the dirt and aimed it low. "You hurt him," Gage said coldly. The sheriff dismounted, scanning the scene. The smoke, the wounded men, the forged paper sticking from Burke's coat. "You've got explaining to do, Burke." Burke tried to speak, but the sheriff cut him off. "Save it for the judge." As the deputies cuffed him, Burke spat at the ground. "You think you've won, Holleran? You'll still lose everything." Gage wiped blood from his mouth. "Maybe, but I didn't sell my soul to keep it." The sheriff glanced at Tessa. "You all right, Miss Moore?" She nodded weakly. "Just tired." When Burke was dragged away and the fire was out, Gage leaned against the porch post, breathing hard. Tessa came to his side, hands trembling. "You're hurt," she said. He gave a half smile. "So's he." "I'll live." The yard was scorched, the air thick with ash, but the worst was over. The smoke from the burned hay still hung low over the yard, soft and gray like morning fog. The sheriff's men hauled Burke and his wounded riders toward town, their horses dragging through the mud. The sound faded, leaving only the slow crackle of dying fire and the moan of a wind that smelled of ash and iron. Tessa stood in the middle of it all, her dress streaked with soot, her hands shaking though the danger had passed. Gage sat on the porch step, holding a cloth to his bleeding shoulder. His eyes were heavy, not from pain but from everything he'd had to carry. She knelt beside him. "You shouldn't move." "He's lost too much blood," he managed a tired grin. "You're starting to sound like Doc Harlan." She gave a faint smile, then looked at the blackened ground. "The ranch?" "It'll grow back," he said quietly. "Grass always does." The silence between them stretched, full of unspoken things. Finally, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the charred edge of the paper she'd burned, the forged debt Burke had used against them. "I kept a piece," she whispered, "so I'd remember what it cost to be free." Gage looked at her, eyes steady. "You shouldn't have to remember that." "But I do," she said. Because if I forget, I'll forget what you risked for me. He didn't answer. He just looked out across the land, where the first rain clouds of spring were forming over the ridges. By midday, word had spread through town. Folks came riding up the road, neighbors, ranch hands, even the blacksmith's wife who'd once gossiped about Tessa. They came with buckets of water, fresh bread and quiet apologies. Didn't know the truth. Miss Moore, the woman said, setting a loaf on the porch. I suppose none of us did. Tessa smiled softly. Knowing now is enough. They stayed to help patch the corral and carry out what was left of the feed. The sheriff returned that evening with news. Burke had confessed to forging the debt and trying to claim the ranch by force. He'll hang for it, the sheriff said grimly. Justice will see to that. Then he turned to Tessa. You're cleared of everything, Miss Moore. No one owns a claim over you now. She looked down at her hands, calloused, strong, no longer trembling. Thank you, Sheriff. When the lawman left, the world seemed strangely still again. The sky turned orange and pink, brushing over the charred earth. Gage stood near the fence, watching the light stretch across the hills. Tessa joined him, her voice quiet. When I first came here, I thought you pitied me. He shook his head. Maybe I did at first. But pity fades. What you gave me doesn't. She glanced up at him. And what was that? He looked at her fully, the fading light catching the dust in his hair. A reason to fight for something more than land. The words sank deep, filling the quiet between them. A faint breeze moved through the fields, bending the grass that still stood. The ranch was scarred but not broken. Tessa leaned on the fence rail. You should rest. The wound, he smiled faintly, hurts less when you're near. Her cheeks flushed and she looked away. You always know what to say, don't you? He chuckled softly. Took me long enough to learn. The last light fell across the yard. The black scars from the fire, the rebuilt posts, the small, stubborn patch of wildflowers near the barn that somehow hadn't burned. Tessa noticed them and smiled. Guess even fire can't take everything. No, Gage said, following her gaze. Some things are too stubborn to die. As the stars began to show, she turned toward the house. You coming in? In a minute, he said. She hesitated. Don't stay out too long. You'll catch a cold. He nodded, watching her go. When she was gone, he looked once more at the land, at the faint trail of smoke rising from what used to be the haystack. Then he whispered to the quiet air. Paid in full. Morning came soft and golden, the kind that smelled of wet soil and clean wind after rain. The storm from the night before had washed away the ash, leaving the ranch fresh again, like the land itself had taken a breath. Tessa stepped outside with a tin of coffee in her hands. She wore one of Gage's old shirts, sleeves rolled, hair loose and curling in the damp air. She watched the sun crawl over the horizon, touching the hills and the half-fixed corral. Gage was already there, leaning against a fence post with his arm in a sling. His face looked better, still tired, but lighter somehow. When he turned and saw her, he smiled in that quiet way of his. Coffee? She asked. Wouldn't turn it down, he said. She handed him the tin, their fingers brushing. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the windmill creaked in the distance, and a hawk circled high above the ridge. The land's healing fast, she said. So's the man who runs it, he replied. She smiled. Small but warm. You mean the one too stubborn to rest? That's the one. He took a sip and winced. Still can't lift my arm right. You will, she said gently. You've already done harder things. He looked at her then, studying her face as though trying to remember every line of it. You've got more grit than anyone I've met, Tessa Moore. She looked down at her hands. Maybe, but I'm tired of fighting. I just want peace. Then stay, he said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Steady, unforced, but full of meaning. She blinked, unsure he really meant it. You don't owe me anything, Gage. He shook his head. It's not about owing. I want you here. The ranch feels different when you're in it. Like it finally has a reason. Her eyes softened, filling with quiet tears she didn't try to hide. I don't know what to say. Don't have to say anything, he said. Just don't leave. She laughed softly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. You sure about that? I talk too much, meddle in your books, make you eat my biscuits, he smiled. Best biscuits I ever had. They stood there together for a while, watching the sun rise higher. The fields shimmered with dew, each drop catching the light like tiny sparks. Life returning, slow but certain. Later that day, folks from town rode out again. They helped restring the fence and clear debris. This time not out of pity but respect. The blacksmith's boy brought new nails. The widow from the boarding house brought pie. The sheriff tipped his hat to Gage. Good to see you back on your feet. Good to still be standing, Gage said. When they left, peace settled over the ranch again. Tessa sat on the porch rail, sewing a tear in one of Gage's shirts. The air smelled of dust and coffee and a little bit of hope. Gage walked up beside her, carrying a new fence post. He nodded toward the edge of the yard. You up for a bit of work? She grinned. Always. Together they carried the post to the fence line. The soil was soft from rain, easy to dig into. When the post was steady, Gage reached out to tie the wire, his left arm trembling but firm. Tessa stood close, holding it in place. There, she said. Good as new. He looked at her, eyes catching the morning light. Better than new. A quiet settled between them, not empty but full of something deep and calm. The kind of silence that comes after storms, when everything broken has been mended enough to start again. Tessa glanced at the horizon. Do you ever think about what comes next? He smiled. Every day. But for once I'm not afraid of it. She nodded slowly. Me neither. He touched the brim of his hat, voice low. You weren't bought, Tessa. You were chosen. Her breath caught, the words echoing through her like the sound of rain on dry ground. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. They stood together, facing the wide stretch of land. The fence whole again, the sun climbing over it all, and somewhere in the quiet, love settled in. Not loud, not sudden, but steady as the earth beneath their boots. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video. It truly helps more folks find these Wild West tales of love and redemption. Subscribe to Shadow Frontier. Tales for more stories where the frontier meets the human heart. There's another story waiting for you right here on the trail. Just click the next one and ride on.